All right, hopefully you enjoyed the talk on distributivism versus socialism. By the way, I mentioned socialism extended to communism. Biggest difference between socialism and communism, the state owns everything. And so you think of socialism, the evolution of socialism is to communism. Like you look in Mao's China, and then the revolution that happened in China, basically started with going in and killing all the landowners and giving it to other people to have that land, and then eventually that didn't work out either, and so the government just took over everything. Right, so that's an example of moving from socialism to communism. You might hear like democratic socialism or something like that. That's just socialism, and then communism is what we call socialism. So there's a lot of confusion on definitions and a lot of things anymore, but just something to think about as you evaluate forms of government approach. Okay, so I've answered the slide in here. Let me move myself over here. Okay, so this lecture is about money. Cool, right? How do you make more of it? Well, therein is the problem. And so in 1971, let me give you some background. 1970, the United States went off of the gold standard. I put the gold and capitalize here. The gold standard. Richard Nixon signed into law a movement away from your dollar bill being backed up by actual gold. Like you could redeem your dollar bill for, I don't remember how many ounces. It was $23 worth an ounce or something like that. You could actually hypothetically redeem it. That's why we had these huge gold deposits, right? Like Fort Knox and other places. And so your dollar value was given by a precious metal, which is the way things have been done all the way back to antiquity, right? In fact, the precious metal was the money, right? You had gold coins and, right, the Roman coins, they're made out of silver, they're made out, right? And depending on their metal would determine their value as well. Okay. Obviously the size, etc. And so, when you look at, antiquity and through the Enlightenment, and into about 1883 is when John Maynard Keynes was born. But you get, through modernity, you get another idea spawned out, right? And it was prominent by John Maynard Keynes, which was Keynesian economics, and this idea and he died in 1946, so he lived right through the, if we wanted to classically define modernity, he entered in modernity, but I would say we're still in modernity / postmodernism, but a modern idea nonetheless. That money didn't need to be pegged to anything tangible like gold. It could be backed up by the reputation of a government. If a government was so big and powerful, like the United States, its reputation alone would give people security to know that, okay, my dollar bill is worth something. It's not just paper. That's called a fiat currency. A fiat currency is one that's not backed up by something tangible. Okay, so in 1971, the United States went off of the gold standard and went to a fiat currency. I mean, if you look at, what the dollar bill is backed up on, if you look up, it's backed up by the full weight of the federal government, essentially. I'm truncating a little bit, okay? Well, what was the result of this change in financial system, all right? So you can look here, 1971, 72. You have this gold line. I'm talking about the figure in front of you, in productivity, okay? So that's how, think about hours worked, right? How much productivity there was. And then compensation, though. You can see compensation took a right turn when we were taking off the gold standard. And so compensation has only gone up since 1948, 115%, where productivity has gone up 246%. What does that mean? Well, it means you're getting, even if you're out, and I'll show you another figure in the next lecture, even if your hourly wage is higher, your purchasing power is not as good, and the amount of work you've had to do to earn that dollar, okay, or that, to earn the same value perhaps that it was in 1972, right? You have to work harder to earn the same thing. And when you work harder to earn the same thing, it may not purchase as much. All right? So we can again here see an idea from modernity that's had consequences. Okay? It's had consequences in our purchasing power. Right now, inflation's a big deal. All right? Well, I'm going to show you a figure in a second. What happens when you pump a whole bunch of money into the system in a hurry? And we've been pumping a lot of money into the system for a long time, the system in the United States. Well, there's something called M2. And I'm not going to go, I know you're like, not economics, right? So we talked about political science. Now we're talking about economics, okay? Traversing through all the liberal arts to look at the picture of modernity, how modernity has affected wellness. Well, you can see across I'll help you understand this. Across the x-axis, all the different years, all the way up to 2020. We had the COVID pandemic, and then a whole bunch of money printing. So, the checks and etc. well, you can see M2 here. M2, think of it as money into the system. So money that people are saving, just total money into the system. There was a linear increase. If you trace that curve all the way back, you guessed it, it started to really rise after the gold standard, after we went off the gold standard. But you can really, if you just use your eyeballs here, about 1995, you really start to see a linear rise in how much money's in the system. So this is part of inflation. Now, the thing with this rise in money, and it's called M2, okay, is there's more money in the system, more money people are saving, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if people are producing more, okay, if a country is growing, that can may not be a bad thing, right? So if there was a lot of supply for a product, let's say, and there's a lot more money in the system, as long as there's enough supply, the prices should be stable. In fact, people will probably buy lots and lots, but there's more supply, and so the price never goes up. Supply and demand, right? If something's low in supply and high in demand, the price is going to go up. That's why, there's price gouging laws, like in a hurricane, right? If you can't get any more gas because all the trucks can't get to you because of the hurricane, and you're at a gas station, the natural thing that would happen is the price of gas would go up significantly because there's not a lot of it, and there's a ton of demand. Everybody wants gasoline for generators for the cars to get out of town or whatever it is, okay? Supply and demand. Well, we just had a huge rise in money. This is a kind of an experiment of what happens when money is disconnected from something stable, okay? So you had a fiat currency. You can just print more in your basement kind of thing, right? And what happens then to that money when there's nothing to buy? Okay, so what you're looking at here is M2, which is, again, just think of this as the money stock. How much money is in circulation? We saw just the last slide in 2020, there's a huge increase in the amount of money that was printed and is in circulation. Okay, so the money's been diluted. Okay, now the velocity says how fast is that money being exchanged? So if I print $100 for you and you go spend that $100, the velocity of money is high, right? You're not keeping that money. You're not holding on to it. If there's something for you to buy, you're going to spend it. Like if there's a car dealership full of cars, and I printed money for everybody in this class, and I said, all right, everybody, you got enough money now to go buy a car, and all of you did. For the most part, all of you went out and bought a car. None of you saved it, right? You just went out and bought a car. But those cars were replaced, so the next class that came by, they could buy a car. That would keep the price down. But what if they stopped making cars, or the speed in which cars were produced slows down? So we all go buy cars at the car lot. The next class comes in, and there's only 3 cars for a class of 15. Now there's a bidding war because everybody wants that car, right? You have inflation. And that's what you're seeing here is the velocity of money slowed down. There was nothing to buy. People were saving it, okay? And as a result, inflation occurs. When you have a lot of money chasing not a lot of goods, you get inflation. So that's one of the things that happens is the supply of the goods. Like this is a classic example as we're going through this COVID pandemic, the post ramifications of that. You see like the chip shortages, you may have heard of that, right? Where there's not enough chips to make more cars. Well, if there's not enough chips to make more cars, what's that going to do to the price of cars? Well, there's not a lot of cars, and there's a whole bunch of money been printed, and everybody's got a lot of money. That means the price of cars is going to skyrocket. Okay? We've seen the same thing with oil and gasoline, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a supply issue. Okay? Now, the gold standard, it wouldn't have fixed everything in this example, but it would have at least stabilized the dollar. In other words, we wouldn't have printed so much money. Okay? Because if you needed to print more money, you need to make more gold. Okay? And so, you'd have to have more gold to match that. So there always would be a steady increase in the amount of money, potentially, if the gold and dollar stuck together, and that doesn't always work either. But it would at least limit how much money could, at least slow down how much money be printed. When there's nothing tangible to attach a currency to, then you can do whatever you want. You can just, you can open a box of Monopoly money, and if you wanted to make more Monopoly money, you just copy it, right? It's not really worth anything. That's why Monopoly money is not worth anything. It's not tied to anything tangible. But if I told you all of a sudden your $500 bill of Monopoly was worth, an ounce of gold, that $500 bill, then I'm going to be careful with it and how I spend it. So I hope that makes sense. Where do these ideas come from? They came from modernity, right? These ideas of Keynesian economics. Now, you may, if you understand these, if you've heard of these terms, you may say, yeah, I agree with that kind of approach. Okay. But these are the consequences of moving away from or moving into these ideas of modernity. Okay. And how has inflation affected all our lives? Quite significantly. Okay. I'll show you a slide in the next lecture about purchasing power then. So even if goods are more expensive than ever, What if we just make more money per hour? Won't that help solve the issue? Maybe help a little bit, but we'll see that that doesn't really make up the ground when it comes to the ability to purchase things. And the last thing here, I just already kind of alluded to this just to kind of show this. Inflation over the time. This is x-axis. This is even through 2020. But the x-axis is inflation across the bottom, and wage growth is on the left side. And what this means is, kind of alluded to just a minute ago, is that inflation, let's say, if you pick the point at 12%. So follow over inflation to get to 12%, and then go all the way up to that red line, and then look over at wage growth. It roughly looks like wage growth was about 8%. So if inflation's 12%, that means wage growth is only going to be about 8% based on this curve. So that means you're losing. I'm losing, right? We're losing 4% in our wages compared to inflation. If they were 1-to-1, that'd be okay because inflation's going up. Like think about the cost of gas, etc., and your wages are growing up commiserately. But that doesn't happen. You see this curve bend, and that means that once you get above about maybe not about 4% ish, you're starting to lose. So when inflation is like right now, at the time I'm filming this, is 8.3%. So if you look at 8.3%, your wages may have only gone up to around 6.3%, and inflation is 8.3%. That means we're losing 2% every paycheck. Okay, and I've seen estimates as closer to 4%. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. I know that's like boom, you just dropped a whole bunch of economics on me. What's up with that? Well, again, this is where did these ideas come from? They came from modernity. Okay, the ideas about economics, they came from modernity. Came from John Maynard Keynes, and this has been the approach from much of the Western world and how money is utilized. You might think that's a good thing, a bad thing, but there's been a change. Just like I've said many times, there's been a mindset shift. There's been some sort of change. That is quote unquote true. Okay. What's happened downstream though, is for you guys to think about and ponder whether you think those are good things or bad things, how they affect, in this case, the dimensions of wellness, which would be directly through financial, but then you can see how it could affect a lot of other areas as financial stress obviously is a significant one that affects our physical stress, right? More hours work, just general stress in general, emotional stress, right? And so forth. Okay. All right. Hope you found that interesting. And I'll see you guys in the next lecture when we talk about a little more personal finances with an example from higher ed again.